most recently, you could see quite a lot of military presence is in Taiwan and is increasing at this moment. So I believe that mainland China is watching this as well. They want to make sure that United States is honoring its relationship, including the three communicate and the normalization and the Taiwanese Relations Act. But if not, then they would move swiftly. I truly believe if they deem that the PRC deem that the United States is using Taiwan as a military base and increase the presence of military personnel in Taiwan, they will move very swiftly in changing the situation by not making Taiwan a part of the United States West Pacific defense chain.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm speaking for the second time to Dr. Joanna Lei, a Taiwanese businesswoman, media executive, and former lawmaker for the Kuomintang Party. Today, we want to discuss in a bit more detail her own work and analysis of how politics in Taiwan is going. Joanna, welcome back.
Hi, Pascal. Good to have another opportunity to talk with you. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic that we get to do a one-on-one and go a little bit deeper into Taiwanese politics. But before we do so, could you maybe give us a little bit more of a background of yourself, where you were working before, how it came that you were working as a media executive in the US, and then your work for the parliament in Taiwan?
Just very briefly, I was born in the last year, right after 400,000 bombs hit Jinmen. So I was born in 1958 and brought up in Taiwan, finished my college education, went to University of Pennsylvania for my graduate work, both master and PhD. My master was mostly on development, on how countries develop its strategy, as well as having social development issues. My PhD work was on political orientations and how it transpired between generations and get communicated from generation to generation. After that, I went to New York and worked in Capital Cities ABC, which was the parent company of ABC TV Network, for about 10 years. The first 6 years was with ABC TV Network, starting from sort of social researcher all the way to working children's social research, news programming, as well as primetime programming. The last 4 years was very interesting because that was the time when you had people like John Negroponte in MIT Multimedia Lab. And we started looking at 500 channel possibility, broadband, digital interactivity, and so on and so forth. So I worked in a strategic investment unit of Capital Cities ABC and was later promoted to be the director and vice president for strategic investment. Then our company was bought by Disney, so we all had all different kinds of hopes and dreams. I went chase another dream and got picked up by headhunters to go to Singapore. In Singapore, my job was to look at media, communication, and information technology investments all of Asia, ex-Japan. And that was the time when you have a lot of mobile licenses and media licenses being issued. Privatization was rampant, and that was the time that major families went into media and communication, and we still have quite a lot of to do with information tech. So spent 7 years in Singapore working in Asia Pacific. Of course, I hit Asian financial crisis. So after I got to Singapore, about the 7th month, Asia financial crisis hit every country. So I had to move from being a strategic investor to people working on debt restructuring, company merger acquisition, trying to salvage companies and salvage the hopes and dreams of individuals. So I think with that short background, you can see that my experience was quite interesting, starting from being a developing country's young students, went to my dream department in University of Pennsylvania, Ann Arbor School, then went into the center of media and what they call now cultural hegemony. So, US is a very strong culturally exporting country, and I was in the crux, in the center in New York and working with lawmakers and others in Washington, D.C. So I went to the sort of first world in the center of its strength. Then I was recruited to yet again back to Asia, helping the developing economies build new sectors, communication, media, and information technology. So I sort of went between the third world and the first world. And then for a period of time, I worked extensively on poverty issues as a scholar. So before I went back to Taiwan in 2000, I sort of went around the world and had a very sort of well-rounded education, understanding the different parts of the world and how their needs and their dreams can and should be met. When I went back to Taiwan in 2000, it was the first time that Chen Shui-bian won. So DPP won the leadership, and that was the first time KMT lost its ruling party position. So in the ensuing 24 years, I've been in Taiwan looking at one after another presidential election and actually participating in two of them. Then we saw quite a lot of differences between the relationship between Taiwan and China because of the differences in the parties. Whoever became the ruling party actually had a lot to say of what we will do and should do across the Taiwan Strait. So we should spend some time looking at that sort of part of the history. That's the last 24 years.
Yes, precisely, because the important piece of information here is that ever since Chiang Kai-shek went to Taiwan in 1949, when he basically had lost the civil war on the mainland, right? He withdrew together with the Republic of China. He took the republic with him, but he was, of course, the representative of the KMT, the Kuomintang, of which you are a party member, right? And the KMT ruled for the entire 50 years until 2000 as a, well, he was a very close to a dictator, but the KMT was in power, point. And then there was the transition to democracy in the late 90s, early 2000s, and in 2000, for the first time, another party came to power, the DPP. And
let me just correct you a little bit on that. Taiwan actually went back to the arms of China in 1945 when Japan lost in the Second World War, when Japan had unconditional surrendered Taiwan, which was under its colonization, back to China. So the KMT government actually came to Taiwan in 1945. And I think that's a part that people often lost. Between 45 and 49, KMT quickly rebuilt the economy of the island because when Japanese left, they actually even took away all the power when they left. So the new KMT members had to rebuild the power grid and rebuild the power structure, and they did it within 3 months. So it was a very important part of the history because Taiwan was then returned back to China and not under the Japanese rule. And the second part is, most of the people thought the democratization started in 2000 when DPP won. In fact, in 1987, it was a very momentous occasion that the son of Chiang Kai-shek, Jiang Jingguo, ended the martial law and allowed different parties to form and run in political elections. So 1987 was the sort of official time when the martial law was ended, and then you had a more free and open political system, and with different kinds of political participation from 1987.
Right. So the transition to democracy or the democratic transition was definitely something that took place over quite a period of time. And within that period, then also like different political streams gathered steam, right, within the country. And today they are more or less separated into three major parties: DPP, your KMT, and what is the third one?
It's TPP.
TPP.
Yeah, it was the People First Party, but the People First Party is no longer that strong. So Ke Wen-je led the TPP, the third party.
Right. And what then happened in these last 24 years? Because in the 1990s, while you were outside of the country, like it was also not completely peaceful. There were always flare-ups with the mainland, right? And there were always moments when the Americans drove aircraft carriers between Taiwan and the mainland. And I think already in the last episode we established, so Taiwan's official name is Republic of China, and mainland's official name is People's Republic of
People's
China.
Republic of China. Yeah.
So it makes sense to talk about the PRC for the mainland and for the ROC over there,
Yeah.
because both agree that they are different versions of a China, right?
Exactly. I think you just put your finger in the right time, because 1990, at the end of the martial law, which was 1987, I just mentioned, after that, you have a lot of domestic debate in terms of the political structure, but also Li Denghui, the then president, realized that you have to maintain peace across Taiwan Strait in order to develop Taiwan. So in 1990, he accepted the suggestion by one of our friends, Ambassador Dai, to form National Unification Council, and also quickly in the year following to adopt a guidelines for national unification. And that is to tell China that we are still working towards a unification regime. So, whatever differences we may have, we will work under National Unification Council with the guidelines to national unification. And the national unification guideline has like 3 phases. The first phase is to reduce hostility. The second phase is to build trust and begin promoting reforms in PRC. And that's, of course, the ROC perspective. We at that time believe that communism is not the ideal structure or system for the entire China. So our idea was on the second phase. We will first reduce the hostility, then we'll build trust and gradually move the PRC away from the communist regime and started their reform. And then the third phase is negotiate a unification under democracy and equality, which means that the two sides, even though Taiwan is very small and China is very large, but we will have an equal unification political structure or institutional system going forward. So that was 1990 and 91 under Li Denghui's rule. And Li Denghui, of course, while he was the chairperson for KMT, he was actually secretly promoting DPP and groomed Chen Shui-bian, Tsai Ing-wen. They were all his underlings. So you can see that it's a very complex history, because Li Denghui was the head of KMT, but under his leadership, he groomed DPP leaders one after another and actually supported DPP by even structurally giving every party a political endowment fund using the election funds.
Why did he do that as a KMT leader, fostering the opposition to his own party?
Well, in his own memoir, you can see that he actually is a strong Japanese colonist. His identity and his identification is Japan. He studied in Japan. He was part of that generation that believed that Japan was an ideal civilized possibility for Taiwan. So with that very strong Japanese identification or identity, he has a lot in common, probably not with Chen Shui-bian, but has a lot in common with Tsai Ing-wen and Lai Ching-te, the last two presidents. And Lai Ching-te is, of course, the current president in Taiwan. So Li Denghui, Chen Shui-bian, Tsai Ing-wen, Lai Ching-te are from a very similar background and have a very strong similar political identity and identification. Their orientations are the same.
Yeah, school of thought. And it's very, very interesting. And this is something that a lot of Europeans and also Americans that is not well understood. Just also the differences in these colonial experiences and what then certain leaders decide. Just the comparison between Taiwan and its view of Japan, and Korea and its view of Japan, and then compare that to Singapore, which was also overrun and came under occupation. And what was his name? Sorry, Singapore. The great
Lee Kuan Yew.
Lee Kuan Yew he was almost shot by the Japanese. He
Exactly.
only escaped by a narrow margin.
Mhm.
But he became a great supporter of, like, we have to follow the Japanese economy.
Mm.
Whereas the Koreans, they did something completely different. Now Taiwan is rather in the camp of Singapore when it comes to that, right? The significant other is the mainland. It's not Japan.
Well, I think we need to look at two great divides. One is those who were in Taiwan during the 50 year of Japanese colonization. Those who were in Taiwan have a very small group. They were part of the Japanese camp, and the others actually fought against Japan. 600,000 people were killed when Japan took over Taiwan. So that period of colonization was not all, all hunky-dory. There were a lot of pains, and 600,000 people were killed. So there are still a very large group of Taiwanese who do not identify themselves with Japanese. However, Lai Ching-te, Tsai Ing-wen, Li Denghui happened to be from the other camp. They were model Taiwanese picked by the Japanese colonists as the ones who were given special opportunities to education, special opportunities to even go to Japan, and their
And
families.
you mean their families? Because they're too young to be handpicked by the Japanese, right?
For example, Li Denghui went to Japan to study for a while. Tsai Ing-wen's father went to Japan. Lai Ching-te's father had a very strong relationship with Japan, and his family had a very strong relationship with Abe Shinzo's family. So there were some Taiwanese being given a special treatment, but let me say that it's not all Taiwanese. So that's one great divide within Taiwan. But there is another great divide. Those who came to Taiwan in 1945 or 49 after the Japanese colonization, they fought Japan in mainland China, which was the most bloody Sino-Japanese war ever. Over 30 million people were killed. Over 268 generals sacrificed their lives. There were a huge number of military and civilian casualties. So those who fought Japan in mainland China actually had a very different views towards that period of time. So you can see that you have two great divide. The ones who came to Taiwan with the government after the colonization period, and within Taiwan, those who were picked as the model Taiwanese and given special treatment, and those who weren't picked and fought Japan from the beginning to the end.
And now let me maybe ask about the political DNA of the KMT, which, to my understanding, has always been firmly rooted in Chineseness, right? They're representatives of the Republic of China, being one of the two Chinas, the one that for the longest time, until the 1990s, until the consensus in 1992 said we're going to reconquer the mainland.
Mm.
Um, how was that DNA in the past, and how is it today? Is this why the KMT is the party that is much more strongly advocating for reunification?
Well, I think you have to look at, again, Li Denghui's rule, because Li Denghui was the chairperson for KMT. So during the time when Li Denghui ruled KMT, he has a very strong movements towards allowing some very strange fractions within Taiwan to be party leaders, party cadres, and so on and so forth. So the original KMT that was under Chiang Kai-shek and Jiang Jingguo, that was the one who did the 10 major infrastructure build, that built TSMC and have moved the landowner sort of land reform in Taiwan, all these things, 9-year compulsory education for all children, and all these things were the original KMT. But under the Li Denghui's rule, he has introduced a lot of party members who has in their ideology and ideas no different from what you can see as today's DPP or TPP. They are political realists. They fought for political positions. And therefore, I think it's really hard to say what KMT is today because it has like two different frictions coming together. However, you are right that wherever or whatever fraction you are from in the KMT, you have to stand behind the Constitution that says there's only one China. And you have to stand behind the guidelines of our laws governing the relationship between people in mainland area and Taiwan area, which is the official name in Taiwan to call our two parts. So you can see that if you are within the KMT camp, you have to stand behind that because you're the party that built the Republic of China and started the Constitution. So how can you not stand behind the Constitution that says there is one China? And then how can you be the party member and not stand behind the laws you passed governing the relationship across the Taiwan Straits? For example, I was telling you that, when we have the guidelines of the relationship of people in Taiwan and people in mainland China for a law that allows us to travel internationally with a passport, but across the Taiwan Strait with a Taiwan card, which was issued, mine is issued by PRC, by mainland, and they would have one issued by Taiwan because we recognize that we're under one umbrella and there are two areas, mainland area and Taiwan area. And that's the law of the land. So if you are part of the KMT, you have to uphold these two most important guidelines, Constitution and the guidelines of the people's relationship across the Taiwan Strait. And also, you probably also have to honor the National Unification Council, the guidelines for national unification, because those were passed during the KMT rule and during the time when KMT is the ruling party.
And this setup is very, very intelligently done and actually very reconciliatory for two entities that officially are still within a civil war, but that are not fighting. And we touched on that last time, I believe. It's like you are really having a not a cold war, it's more of a warm peace inside a war situation, and that you recognize each other's documents, although there's of course a huge disagreement of who is the prime authority, and that's the whole thing that needs to be solved.
Yeah, but who is the prime authority? I think there is a reality that people in Taiwan have to recognize. In 1972, when I was in junior high school, we were no longer representing the entire Republic China in the United Nations, right? 1972 was
and that's something a lot of people don't know, that until 1972, the seat in the Security Council, the China seat, was occupied by somebody from Taiwan, from the
Republic of China, because we were part of the post-war powers that built the United Nations. In fact, Taiwan representative proposed the setup of World Health Organization. We actually proposed it. So we were a very big part of the UN movement, a movement towards peace after the Second World War. But we no longer have the seat in 1972 after Resolution 2758. And then in 1979, January 1st, the United States severed its relationship with ROC, which is Taiwan, and built its relationship they call normalization, normalized its relationships with PRC. So that major shift in recognizing who is the official representation of the entire China is a reality that people in Taiwan had grappled with and had to live with for a long, long time, since 1970s.
Now, let me ask you this, because to me, it seems as if the cross-strait conflict since 1949 went through a major change. To me, the old conflict was centered around who is China. And the current conflict is centered around what is Taiwan. Is that a fair way of portraying it? And when did the switch happen?
I think you're really, really intelligent in framing it that way. Let's look at three moving pieces here. The first moving piece is Beijing, which never budged. The One China principle says One China include Taiwan. And if you push that, then you have two options. You either have peaceful unification or forced unification, right? If there's only one China. So that's China's perspective that didn't change. Originally, Taiwan's perspective was the same too, but right now, Taipei, DPP's perspective is one China, one Taiwan. So they also recognize that there's only one China, but that one China does not include Taiwan. And that gives them the freedom to do de facto or de jure independence, or the freedom to promote. Because if you ask people in DPPs, do you believe there's one China? They say, yeah, sure, there's one China. But that one China doesn't include Taiwan. Now, let's look at the third moving piece. The third moving piece is the United States. They shifted the language to one China policy. They don't say one China principle. It's only one word. One China policy, the difference of one word. This one China may or may not include Taiwan. So sometimes they will do, okay, people across Taiwan Straits will decide what they will do. So they are in non-interference, non-intervention. Sometimes they will do double deterrence. You don't do unification, you don't do independence, they would deter both sides. So double unification, a deterrence. And sometimes in the last 6 or 8 years, they do something of a quasi-intervention by supporting DPP's leaders in their separatist claim. So you can see that the Tsai Ing-wen in her second term and Lai Ching-te in his first year have made stronger proclamation in terms of an independent Taiwan that has very little to do with China. Sometimes they use the term ROC, but that ROC has nothing to do with China.
This is the exact problem, and then of course the portrayal of Taiwan, especially in the Western media, as a country. This is prevalent, right? At least for the last 15, 20 years, to talk about Taiwan as if though it was just like Thailand, just like Singapore, just like Japan, its own independent entity, and it was evil China that is trying to assert its power over a independent nation. When the situation is so much more complex, and yes, you have passports, but yes, you also recognize each other's documentations, and of course, China, mainland China, is the largest trading partner of Taiwan, and so on and so forth. But this misrepresentation of what the actual state of affairs is a very dangerous political tool, isn't it, in order to manipulate also support for or against independence?
Absolutely, because they now talk about Taiwan as it has never had any relationship with mainland China, and therefore its claim for independence and for self-determination should be respected according to the UN Charter. So let's just take a look at whether Taiwan and mainland China is truly irrelevant. I think there are facts, there are fictions, and there are easy identity politics. Let's take a look at the last 500 years, from Ming Dynasty to the Dutch colonization, to Zheng Chenggong's kingdom of Zhongning, to Qing Dynasty, to Japanese rule, to ROC in Taiwan. So you're looking at about 500 years of that entire period. Dutch colonization was 38 years. Japanese colonization was 50 years. So out of the 500, 88 years had something to do with countries outside of China. The others were dynasties, generals, administrations, magistrates sent from China to Taiwan and rule Taiwan. So when DPP claims, and if you look at their sort of curriculum in the elementary school and junior high school, that Taiwan has a very strong relationship with the Dutch colony in international global trade, and have a very strong influence made by Japanese colonists, and therefore all the civilized part was from Japan, those were 88 years out of 500. In fact, they nearly never mentioned the Qing dynasty governed Taiwan for 200 years. So there were very large China and Chinese influence on Taiwan, starting from who those early immigrants were to the kinds of culture, religion, language they brought from their homeland to Taiwan, and the relationship between the settlers in Taiwan and their home countries or homeland, home counties. Those were not mentioned nowadays by the DPP government. They actually underplayed the China connection to the nth degree, and they promoted the glorified Dutch connection and the Japanese connection. But like I said, if you just counted the number of years, there were more than 500 years of recent history. 88 years are from Dutch, 38, 50 from Japan, and the rest were all from various regions, dynasties from China. So Taiwan was always a part of China. It's not just today because Chiang Kai-shek government came to Taiwan. It is because it had always been a part of China, at least for 400-500 years.
And how big is the local, the domestic identity factor to your mind? So I have quite a few Taiwanese friends, very close ones, and they do identify as Taiwanese. On the other hand, none of them would dispute that the Taiwanese are part of the larger Zhonghua family, of the larger Chinese family, not Chinese in the political sense, but Chinese in the ethnic sense. Nobody would dispute that. They all agree. No, of course we're part of that.
Right, because a lot of them actually carry with them their family names from the origin. So they will use the name of as Tang Hao to identify where they were from. Now, I think it's twofold. One is a very easy fabrication of a different kinds of identity so that Taiwan as a people should and can enjoy self-determination. If we were part of Chinese, how can Taiwan enjoy self-determination and go to the United Nations? So for Taiwan independence movement, they need to have a different Taiwanness, which will grant people in Taiwan their right to self-determination. So politically, it's an easy and a must. The other one is, I think, it's a identity politics. And that's the sad part in Taiwan. If you go to the heated debates during the major sort of campaigns, people will say, oh, you mainlanders, go back to China. Go away. Just like people in the United States will ask people in Mexico to go back. But if they were born in the United States, they have every right as the other person born in the United States. Why did they have to suffer from this identity politics and being used as a scapegoat? But unfortunately, in Taiwan, that was also the case. So one is the necessity for Taiwan independence in terms of building a different, unique identity of Taiwanness for self-determination. And the other one is a very cheap trick for identity politics, especially at the time of the ballots. When you ask for people to vote for me, okay, vote for me and don't vote for those people who should be going away. When I was running for office, when people call me mainland pig, I sort of accepted it because it's still Chinese. You're Taiwanese, there are people from mainland, and if you hate me, you call me a pig from mainland. That's okay. But if you started calling me a Sino pig, like a Japanese will call me, then I will not accept it because then you are identifying yourself as from the Japanese colonization period and as a Japanese, and you're calling me a Chinese pig. So there were a very subtle, very fine lines in all these sort of identity tricks. But I think the most difficult part is for outsiders to understand that it's not that black and white. It is not mainlanders and Taiwanese. It's not that just Japanese and Taiwanese. It's all intricate and it's very, very complex.
What is your view on the impact that these two significant others still have today? Japan, on the one hand, because you mentioned it several times, is there still a foreign influence from Japan on Taiwan that goes beyond, let's anime and manga and cultural influence, and then the United States, the US? the military presence of the US in the Taiwan Strait was always important from the very moment that the bombs stopped falling on Kinmen up until now. How do you view that influence?
Let's take a look at the United States first. Initially, up until 1979, by mid-year 1979, we still had a joint defense treaty. So Taiwan relied heavily on the United States in defending Taiwan in terms of armament, in terms of training, and in terms of joint operability. So that's all the way until 1979 mid-year, because after the diplomatic relationship was severed, there were another 6 months before the joint defense treaty ended, 1979. But after that, a lot of people believe, and I actually read an article today, that the United States has been defending Taiwan, but hey, actually they didn't. They didn't really defend Taiwan because in the Taiwan Relations Act, they were allowed to provide Taiwan arms in defensive nature, and they couldn't participate in actually live defense of Taiwan. And that will be against their relationship with PRC. When they established when they normalized the relationship with PRC, it has 3 conditions. Normalizing of the relationship, withdrew their troops was the second, and ceased the operation of the Joint Defense Treaty was the third. So they actually didn't have a military presence on Taiwan until most recently. Most recently, you could see quite a lot of military presence is in Taiwan and is increasing at this moment. So I believe that mainland China is watching this as well. They want to make sure that United States is honoring its relationship, including the 3 communique and the normalization and the Taiwan's Relations Act. But if not, then they would move swiftly. I truly believe if they deem that the PRC deem that the United States is using Taiwan as a military base and increase the presence of military personnel in Taiwan, they will move very swiftly in changing the situation by not making Taiwan a part of the United States West Pacific defense chain vis-a-vis or against mainland China. So that's the United States. The Japanese issue is a complex one because, as I said earlier, there were people fighting Japan for those 50 years, left and right. Over 600,000 people were killed. However, the leaders in current DPP's Taiwan independence movement are from the Japanese fraction. Taiwan independence movement has 2 main branches. One is the one fighting against quote unquote totalitarian regime. And they were primarily in the United States, and they had very strong relationship with the United States and with especially the Democratic Party. The other branch was those who identify and still have family ties in Japan. Those Taiwanese started from being a Japanese colonists and then became a self-identified Japanese. And those are the ones currently in the center of the DPP party regime, Lai Ching-te being one. So even if there are only one Lai Ching-te, being the president, he has a lot of influence to what the overall party does vis-a-vis Japan. And in their rules, they have a very important tool, which is the curriculum. They have changed the curriculum. They took away a lot of Chinese content by adding back in Japanese content. So they actually, in my view, fabricated a Taiwan history that glorified the Japanese occupation and Japanese colonization, underplayed any other contribution made by people, especially from mainland China, through generations, through different dynasties. And those were done using curriculum as a base. So if your friend, probably of your year, of your age, were born 10, 20 years later, if they were in elementary school right now, they probably will have a very strong Taiwan-Japan identification rather than a Taiwan-China identification.
Right. I mean, this is unfortunately what political parties sometimes do. They try to use and abuse curricula in order to foster perceptions among the young. But the fact that Taiwan is a functioning democracy and has a multi-party system also leads to certain interesting moments, like I think 2 years ago, when actually right around the time when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, there was also a moment when the former president your president, Mr. Ma, who was a KMT president who came after 8 years of DPP. You had 8 years of Mr. Ma. Mr. Ma was the one who shook hands with Xi Jinping, I think in 2016, right at the end, right? And he went 2 years ago again to the mainland on a goodwill trip, right when feelings were boiling again. And doesn't this help actually to mend fences? Although Ma was not in power and KMT is not in power, but that parts of the Republic of China can actually still say, like, hey, by the way, not everybody agrees, so try to mend fences while the other ones do their thing.
Well, I do think that Ma Ying-jeou is performing an extremely important role as an ex-leader of Taiwan, because during his 8 years, we had government-to-government, agency-to-agency negotiations, signed treaties, agreements, not treaties, but signed agreements directly. Before that, we had to go through other organizations, sometimes NPO, NGOs, in order to have those arrangements signed. So Ma Ying-jeou represents a move forward. Like I said, in the guidelines for eventual unification, there are 3 different phases. The first is reduce hostility, and the second one is to promote a certain kind of discussion. And Ma Ying-jeou is certainly a part of that promotion of eventual peace. I think we have, looking at the pendulum swinging back and forth a few times. In 2005, when Lian Zhan went to mainland China with Hu Jintao, we started a plan that was agreed by the 2 leaders that we will have 2 different fora. One is development and another is peace. The development fora is before we have an eventual sort of peaceful resolution of the cross-strait situation, we can start by promoting economic cooperation, and China can start aiding Taiwan's economy, which was not in that good a shape at that time. So the development forum actually started and moved according to schedule. The other forum never happened. That was the peace forum. The 2 leaders agreed that, well, let's start thinking about if we were to unify in certain way, shape, or form, what would that look like? You know, if Taiwan doesn't like one country, 2 system, then what would you like? So there were an attempt to say, let's put our minds together. Let's start drafting, just like, starting discussing on what the future might be. That unfortunately never happened. During the 8 years of Ma Ying-jeou's reign, we had a lot of economic agreements, including ECFA and so on and so forth, but we never moved in the peace forum. We never were able to sit down and look at, okay, let's not have a war. We don't want to fight. Then how do we approach peace? How can we have a system that would allow us to move forward? And that new framework for cross-strait relations just never happened, unfortunately. So I think if we look at Ma Ying-jeou today, he started by meeting Xi Jinping in his last month, in November 2016. And then in the past year, 2024, he brought young students to China, invited delegates of young students from China to Taiwan, therefore opening the cross-strait door again. So he still has a lot of roles to play in terms of moving our peace agenda, picking up the peace forum that never happened from 20 years ago, because that was 2005, now it's 2025. So we didn't move forward on this for 20 years, and maybe this year will be the time that he can do that. If he can do that, or if he should decide to do that, I think he will open at least another venue for us not go directly into war or at least not to discuss war all the time.
This is super important, I believe. Like the envisioning non-violent futures is extremely important, and one also must credit, all of the different leaders in Taiwan and in mainland China who actually had ideas, because there's a lot of ideas. And I just want to run one of them just briefly by you. This was an idea of the former vice president of Taiwan under Madame Lu Shulian, a woman I admire very much. She's from the DPP, of course, and
Right.
a few years ago she had this idea of making Taiwan an island of peace and neutrality, and she gave me this, a nail clipper, one of my most favorite possessions, that
Yeah.
says in Chinese characters, peace, neutrality, the dream of Taiwan. And her vision was that Taiwan should declare neutrality, not independence, just neutrality. No military bases, but also no PRC troops. Just take Taiwan out of the geopolitical considerations as a way out. What is your view on such creative ideas to get away from the "are we independent or not" question?
I do meet Annette Lu quite often. And, oftentimes we will go to peace forum together. So I think if there were any sort of consensus in Taiwan for most of the people, is that we don't want war.
Yeah.
Taiwan cannot afford war. We don't have strategic depth. There is no overall resilience. We had a very disastrous situation a couple of years back with about 300 people burned terribly. And that 300 people actually exhausted our medical system for central to North Taiwan. So if you think about a war with 5,000, 20,000 casualties, there is no way we are going to survive that kind of hit. So people have a very strong consensus, I think sane people who believe that we can get another solutions outside of our small differences. Of course, if you are DPP and promoting Taiwan independence, you don't think it's a small difference. You want a big difference. But let me also add this. In addition to Anna Lu, there were a lot of peace promoters in Taiwan. These are peacemakers who have put forth different kinds of propositions. Some people have even suggested federations, commonwealth, common market. But in addition to that, let me just add one more perspective. China, through its history, thousands of years of history, had about half and half. Half of the time, China had a unitary structure, one single government ruling the entire China. But about 40% of the time, you had separated states, different kinds of arrangements in different parts of China, and they're still considered one dynasty. So for people in the Western philosophy of nation states, especially the ones after the Second World War, it's very hard for them to fathom the complexity of Chinese view of what unification and what separated states might be. There were a lot of different kinds of arrangements, starting from 春秋战国, 五代十国, different dynasties have north and south, and so on and so forth. So I think we are a lot more flexible in understanding that you can devise different kinds of financial and political structure. And that structure could be used for fostering a future, including the different parts that mainland China is now dealing with and Western has been accusing them for, in terms of Mongolia, in terms of Xinjiang, in terms of Tibet, in terms of Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau. All these places, China had been accused of being not respecting their individual wishes, and that we may add, it's still a sort of Western nation state idea, still an idea of self-determination, which is very different from, if you look at this 3,000 to 4,000 recorded history of China, you have different political arrangements. One of the arrangements is very much like federacy, which the best example I can give is Åland Island in Finland after the USSR and Norway. Åland Island situation can be determined or can be termed as federacy, which is different from federation. So I think let's not be caught by those definitions using Western concept of what nation states can arrange their relationship with. China has a lot of flexibilities in history, have seen a lot of different political arrangements. If we just put our minds to it, if we just determined to make sure that we have peace and to resolve the current issue not through war, then I'm very confident that we can find a solution. And probably the most simple one is asking, say, Ma Ying-jeou and Xi Jinping to start a dialogue in Jinmen and Xiamen in both sides across the closest part of the two regimes, and let them start discussing what our new form or new future might be, which may not be what they think is the Hong Kong model or whatever model. We must be able to have more creative models in the 21st century. It is already a new era. We have no reason to go into war whatsoever.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm fascinated that you brought up the example of the Åland Islands, which are part of Finland, but Swedish speaking and right between them, and they are basically autonomous. But the Finnish army has no right to go there because they are actually also neutralized. They are officially have a neutrality agreement, and there are these very creative models in order to pacify a potentially dangerous situation because of history and things that happened. What is it that at the moment blocks a more productive dialogue between the DPP and and mainland China? Is it pure ideology, or is there on the Chinese side also an unwillingness to debate with the DPP?
I think there is a precondition for a real discussion to happen. The precondition happened to be the same. It is for PRC to recognize ROC. For a long, long time, they do not recognize ROC. If you don't recognize the Republic of China, then what you have is a Republic of Taiwan. So PRC can decide whether they will recognize the Republic of China, allowing it an official status to go into discussion or negotiation. So that's from the China side. By the way, I'm not speaking out of sort of theory. When I went to the United States, when I filled the entry form, I was not allowed to write ROC. I had to write Taiwan. And that is because PRC at the time didn't want the United States to recognize ROC.
Yeah, maybe just very quickly, there's this really interesting coincidence that for two completely different reasons, the PRC has no interest in reminding everybody that the ROC still exists over there, and most people in the ROC, at least the DPP people, have no interest in emphasizing the ROC because you emphasize the China, right? So they emphasize the Taiwan.
Exactly.
So for two different reasons, both sides de-emphasize the fact
Correct.
that the ROC exists.
That's right. So I think the most important sort of key to a real discussion for the PRC side is to recognize how ROC still exists. But more difficult is for DPP to also recognize using ROC and not a de facto Taiwan. What they're saying to me for a long time, that I had a lot of friends, the promoters, who said, we were saying ROC in Taiwan, ROC on Taiwan, ROC is Taiwan. It's the last phase. So they are now just using ROC as a pseudonym for Republic of Taiwan, right? Yeah. That's why DPP has migrated from their three phases. Now, if DPP truly wanted to promote peace and start a dialogue, I think they would have to abandon the Taiwan independence, at least based on the best interest of the people. They have to abandon the self-determination, joining the United Nations kind of formal, de jure Taiwan independence idea. which they sort of already did, but they wouldn't recognize it officially. If they truly recognize Republic of China and decided to engage with PRC in discussions of a political future going forward, and that would give them two things. Once they would still stand on the ROC constitution, which will give the history from 1912 all the way to today. And secondly, they would still sit on the guidelines of the laws and relationship across Taiwan Straits. That is the one we started from 1990 so that the people across Taiwan Straits can coordinate and sort of cooperate across Taiwan Straits. So that's based on our rule of law, our legal structure, our constitutional structure, to really come back and embrace ROC would be a very strong position for DPP to show mainland China that they should start engaging with DPP again, because they are not engaging DPP at this moment. They have ceased all communication, official communication with DPP for a while. So for DPP to start re-engaging China, it has to send a very strong signal saying that we are not pursuing Taiwan independence and we are not going to be a US military base. We want to pursue a peaceful future for people across Taiwan Straits. And that would be acknowledging the Republic of China from both sides.
Acknowledging the Republic from both sides. But what we have seen in Ukraine was that over a period of time, the United States and NATO forces managed to capture good parts of the political process, or at least enough of the political process in order to enlist, in the end, Ukraine in this proxy war against Russia. And there's these big fears that the same thing might happen in Taiwan. If you look at the political structure of Taiwan, at the way also political power is wielded, is the Taiwanese, the Republic of China structure more resilient to this kind of foreign interference, or is it already happening? Are already parts being co-opted into and put in online for that war that the United States keeps saying we're going to have and seem to be wanting rather sooner than later?
Unfortunately, it's the latter, because if you look at public opinion up pages, articles by scholars, they are all talking about a Taiwan Strait conflict as an eventuality. They believe that it would eventually happen. And it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and also became a very dangerous omen for people in Taiwan. I think the unfortunate fact is, when I spoke with, like in Berlin, to the economic and political elites, they mentioned to me that we have no choice. We have to take your official representation as is. In other words, we have to take the words of your president. We have to take your words of the DPP assigned embassy or ambassadors in our country. And that official status and official position will have a very strong US support at this point. United States is supporting an independent Taiwan, or at least a separated Taiwan from mainland China. And the unfortunate fact is, all the wishes and dreams of people in Taiwan cannot override the officialness of Lai Ching-te, of his representation in Washington, in other places. So we're not heard. We are not heard. The people who wanted peace and didn't believe that we have no results, we actually have ability to resolve our issues. And those are the wise people who were part of the government. Like you said, KMT ruled the government for over 50 years, and there were lots of trained politicians, diplomats, and bureaucrats, ministries. There were a lot of people trained to deal with very complex issues. In fact, much better trained than the DPP current assignees. So, but they are not in the position, not in an official position to represent the people. unfortunately, this might be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and certainly that is why people like me will try to speak out so that people outside of Taiwan at least have an opportunity to listen through programs like yours, Pascal, the complicated nature, the nuances behind the words, and not just take Taiwan as, oh, the model democracy that's trying to fight against another sort of very strong invader from mainland China. In fact, like I said earlier, Taiwan is not a model democracy. We are developing into an illiberal democracy. We are currently an electoral autocracy. In fact, our political systems, the election system, is under the influence of popularism. So people make promises and try to work to appease those fractions that will give them votes. And our media is inculcating the public by promoting one after another time the fiction rather than facts. And our curriculum is teaching our kids a part of the history that was fabricated. So in terms of education, media, as well as our electoral system, we have a lot to work on. It is not to say there's no hope, but currently it is not the ideal democracy or the model democracy, the model the value partner that Biden had made people believe that Taiwan is. So hopefully your listeners will have some time to listen and to find the complicated nuances and to better understand that there is more than one voice in Taiwan. And there are a lot of people hoping for peace in Taiwan.
And I can attest to that because even all of my DPP friends, they also want peace. I mean, the one thing that all of Taiwan agrees pretty much almost exclusively is no war. The question is, how do we get there? Joanne, we will certainly talk again, especially when things come up. If people want to read from you, do you have a place where you publish something where people can follow you?
Actually, I'm too lazy, but I will try to be more diligent. Thank you so much for reminding me.
So I will have you again on my channel. Joanna Lei, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Pascal.